The Black Hole, a novel by Alan Dean Foster. Chapter 11. McCrae continued to remonstrate with Durant. "Alex, you can't throw your life away. You're a respected scientist, a good research man. You've got discoveries of your own ahead of you. Discoveries that will mean something, because you'll be alive to expound on them." She was pleading desperately with him now. "Don't throw all that away. Let him go if he wants to, but you—" "He can do it, Kate," Durant countered excitedly, blindly. "I know he can. There's a whole new universe beyond the black hole. A point where time and space as we know it no longer exist. We'll be the first to experience it, see it, the first to explore it." He turned away from her, his attention going back to the shifting images on multiple screens, smothered by the feeling that great things were about to happen. It did not matter. Kate was no longer listening to him anyway. A look of utter horror transformed her visage as Vincent's hurried but graphic description of his own little discovery resounded in her brain. "Initiate Cygnus process," Reinhardt was saying. "Commence generation sequence." At the far end of the ship, the order was received by humanoid technicians. Adjustments were made to controls and instrumentation. 8 enormous, drastically modified engines began to glow softly, taming the annihilation beginning within. The aura that appeared around each engine was a radiant side effect of the Cygnus process, the halo of power. Aboard the Palomino, they could neither hear Reinhardt's commands nor witness his directives being carried out, but they could feel the results. A subtle vibration shook the cockpit, communicated from the skin of the Cygnus. There was a moment's silence as each man absorbed the import of that vibration while their bodies absorbed the actuality of it. Then Booth began looking around wildly, like a man seeking some miraculous, transtemporal means of escape. "He's going to do it! The crazy fool really means to do it! He'll kill us all if you don't get us out of here right now, Dan. We've got to pull clear while there's still—" "Take it easy, Harry," Holland ordered tautly. "He wants us free to monitor his flight into the hole. We've still got time." "He may have changed his mind. He may want to take us all down with him, to prove just how insane he is. You're gambling with our lives, and the odds are going up every second you hesitate." "Harry, shut up." Someone besides the men on the Palomino was aware that the time for discussion had ended. The time for decision-making had arrived and was passing all too quickly. Kate McCrae emerged from the fog of mind-to-machine contact. She blinked twice, then spoke with quiet finality to the man who was no longer her colleague. "Alex, we've got to get back to the ship. Now. They're preparing to leave. Dan can't wait for us much longer." "I'm staying." Durant's tone left no room for argument. She still held one weapon she hadn't used. She employed it now. "You don't understand, Alex. Reinhardt's a murderer. And worse, those creatures over there, the ones monitoring all the instruments and flight consoles, they aren't humanoid. They're human, or they were once." A crack appeared in Durant's surety. "I don't follow you, Kate." "Use your head, Alex. I know you've got one. They're what's left of the original human crew. They've been surgically altered on Reinhardt's orders to obey only his commands. Their wills, their humanity, have been destroyed." I don't believe." McCrae pressed her attack. "It's true, Alex," she continued, trying to keep an eye on Reinhardt at the same time. "Vincent and an old supply robo-clerk saw the surgery. You remember Dan's story about the funeral, and Harry's about the robot with the limp?" No. Durant spun away from her, gods and decisions crumbling around him in the face of the unbelievable. Could Vincent be mistaken? Booth, sure. Dan, maybe. But a mechanical as reliable as Vincent? One trained to observe and report only facts. Vincent disliked Reinhardt. Could that be enough reason for a machine as facile and advanced as Vincent deliberately to fabricate? It couldn't be true. It couldn't. Reinhardt must have noticed something amiss, because he was walking toward them now, his gaze trained not on Durant, but on McCrae. "What's wrong, Dr. McCrae?" He was staring intently at her. "You look ill." Durant was fighting to organize his thoughts, to make sense from chaos. "I need time," he thought frantically. "Time to think this through. But there is no time." "Kate's upset that I have elected to go with you," he said hurriedly, covering for her. "I'm afraid she's also going to join us," Reinhardt informed them calmly. "No!" She took a step away from them both. Reinhardt regarded her with a mixture of compassion and an icy resolution his previous declamations had only hinted at. "The optimum conditions for entering the black hole exist now. Everything is functioning perfectly. With your presence, a new opportunity offers itself. You see, my dear, your S-Blink will ensure that news of our success gets back to the Palomino via the robot you are in mind contact with, and thence to the world. You will be helping to complete the mission your father gave his life for. A rare honor. Your friends will leave shortly, to save their own lives, not realizing they are following my plan for them." "What you say about my father is not true," she burst out. Reinhardt sighed. There was much to do. He had no time for this silly woman. Like all the rest of them, she could see no farther than the pitiful span of her own life. She didn't realize that, measured against the opportunity of unlocking the secrets of the universe, a life was nothing. Nothing. It seemed that she and her friends had learned everything. There was no longer any reason for the masquerade he had been conducting. Durant began edging unobtrusively toward the nearest console. The figures there ignored him, intent on their respective duties. "My father was a loyal and honorable man," McCrae was saying, refusing to be intimidated. "He would never have condoned the abandonment of this ship as long as her life support systems functioned." "I say he did." Durant now stood poised next to a humanoid operating a portion of the complex drive-to-direction instrumentation. Still, the figure ignored him. Durant put a hand over the reflective parabolic face shield, waited for the mechanical to object. It did not. He pulled the shield off. A face that had once been human continued to take no notice of him, continued to stare only at the controls it had been programmed to watch. Eyes that were smaller versions of the face mask itself stared dully at a barely perceived world. They hinted only at the void behind them. Durant's mouth dropped open, and he began backing away, gaping in disgust at the thing that had once been a man with hopes and loves and hates just like himself. A man who had been drained of his humanness as thoroughly as a bottle is drained of its contents. Only the empty shell remained behind, refilled with the dank, noisome syrup of blind obedience to Reinhardt. "You might as well let me go join my friends." McCrae continued to speak with more confidence than she felt. "I won't send any messages for you, whether you're successful or not." "I'm sorry to hear you say that, my dear, but I have no time to argue with you. I would have preferred your cooperation. Perhaps it's better we work another way." He glanced to his right, spoke with regret. Maximilian, see that the young lady receives appropriate medical treatment immediately. There was a hum that rose above the susurration of power flowing through the ship as the massive robot moved toward McCrae. She looked in disbelief at the nearing machine, realizing instantly what was in store for her. "No, you can't!" "Don't stand there pleading like an idiot child," she told herself frantically. "He's already altered." The word came hard in the face of her personal involvement. "Most of the ship's crew. Why should he hesitate to stop at you?" "Let her go!" Durant made a sudden, wild charge for Reinhardt. He never reached him. A burst of bright, deadly light from one of Maximilian's lasers drilled him as neatly as any knife. Reinhardt allowed himself a disappointed glance at the scientist's prone form. "I'm sorry for you, Dr. Durant. I had hopes, for a while, that you might. But I expected too much of you. A pity you could not rise above your primitive self. I would have enjoyed your companionship." "If there is any justice at all," McCrae said viciously, "that black hole will be your grave, Reinhardt." "We are dealing here only with the laws of physics, my dear, not with the arbitrary social contracts man calls law. If I perish, it will be only a matter of physics, not the other. You will die with me." Holland's hand paused, hovered over a control as Reinhardt's voice suddenly issued from the console speaker. "You're cleared for liftoff, Captain Holland. I will allow you ample time to clear the Cygnus's null G field, but you must aim to achieve sufficient escape velocity immediately. Doctors Durant and McCrae have elected to remain on the Cygnus to participate in the great experiment. They wish you and your friends well." "I told you," Booth said knowingly. "Alex has bought Reinhardt's theory completely. He's as thoroughly under that madman's control as if he'd been surgically fixed like the others." "Maybe he has," Holland countered. "But Kate wouldn't." Of one mind, they all turned to Vincent. "Dr. Durant's opinions are no longer of concern. He is dead. Maximilian killed him as he was rushing at Dr. Reinhardt. They're taking Dr. Kate to the hospital." Holland was on his feet instantly. Reinhardt's intentions were as clear to him and the others as they had been to McCrae herself. "Get old Bob to show us the fastest way there. Harry, you stay here and watch the ship. Don't let anything aboard until we get back." Booth nodded. Seemed about to say something, but decided not to. Pizer made a move to leave. "Sorry, Charlie," said Holland. "You're staying too." "What?" Pizer looked back at him in confusion. "You'll need all the firepower you can get." "We may have enough time to reach her, and we may not. It's important to let the people back home know what's happened out here. Harry can't pilot the ship. Don't wait too long, Charlie. Get her off before the gravity outside the Cygnus's field becomes too strong." "But Dan!" "That's an order." "I wish you a safe voyage home, Mr. Pizer." Vincent swiveled to leave the cockpit. "Just make sure you get back aboard and in one piece, Heart of Steel. Then we can wish each other a safe voyage home." Holland followed the two robots back through the Palomino toward the tube connecting them with the Cygnus. In the power center, humanoid figures waited patiently at their stations. They had no need of a superior officer to direct them, as one had in the early days of the ship. All responded now only to one man's orders, and they responded in unison, extensions of his own hands and mind. The glow from the engines in the huge chamber below them intensified. It gleamed from their polished, featureless faces. "Engage thrusters," came Reinhardt's command. "Slow at first. Constant monitor on delivery systems." The crew of almost men responded smoothly, efficiently. Outside, the section of space astern of the Cygnus assumed the aspect of a small sun. The expanding rush of intense light only hinted at the application of power to come. Slowly the Cygnus began to move, distorting space around her in ways Einstein had only hinted at, for a purpose he could not have imagined. The reception area was deserted when Holland and the robots reached it. By keeping their weapons out of sight, they avoided activating the hidden defense system that had disarmed them on their first venture into the great vessel. Old Bob, his repellers whining in protest, started off at high speed for the nearest elevator. Meanwhile, McCrae was fighting not to think of what awaited her as the compact air car transported her and her silent mechanical escort down the corridor. She tried instead to console herself with the knowledge that Dan and the others would probably escape. She tried very hard, but she still wanted very much to scream. The air car hissed to a halt, and the sentries motioned her out. They walked down several corridors, turned a number of corners. As they entered a small anteroom that might once have been a reception area, she noticed several other sentries dragging bits and pieces of two no longer intact robots out from behind a desk. One of the guards moved to a wall communicator, punched the button located there. The alarm irritated Reinhardt. All his life he had been bothered by the intrusion of trivia, so he would not allow himself to become concerned, even after he saw the two destroyed sentries. The thought of a rescue directed toward McCrae had seemed out of the question. That was changed, now that it appeared the others knew the location of the only operative surgery. Until now, he had known only that the others were aware of his manipulation of the crew. The fact that they knew where the manipulations were carried out might induce them to try something foolish. Interference at this stage was intolerable, could not be permitted. He required the use of a compliant Dr. McCrae immediately. It would be best to take precautions. The time has come to liquidate our guests, except for their robot and Dr. McCrae. If they succeed in boarding the Cygnus, the others are to be eliminated. Do not damage their ship. Maximilian turned obediently and started for the near console, composing the orders he would issue to the sentries. Buzzers sounded and echoed down every passageway. The little knot of machines and man slowed. Could Reinhardt already know we're on board? Holland mused aloud. I do not think so. Vincent was searching attentively both ahead and behind them. But he has evidently decided we may try to rescue Dr. Kate. Nearby, old Bob fluttered unsteadily on his repellers. They sounded dangerously close to grid failure. I knew we should have dragged those sentries you shot and hidden them somewhere else. If you recall, Vincent reminded him, we did not have the time. The two of us dragging a pair of exploded mechanicals around with us would also likely have drawn more attention than we did. He looked back at Holland. It seems indisputable that Reinhardt now knows we are aware of the location of his abattoir, and suspects we'll head there. He's right. We've no time for subtlety. Holland led them up the corridor. 6 sentries rushed down a passage. None save one thought to glance into the narrow service access way leading off to one side, and he sensed only shadows within. When they had vanished around the far turn, Vincent leaned out, checked both directions. Clear, he informed his companions. Holland followed him as they dashed across the corridor, making for another which old Bob insisted interconnected with the one leading to the surgery. After a while, Holland slowed, waited for old Bob to catch up. He had fallen behind twice already, his internal engines inadequate to the demands of continued speed. I wish he could move a little faster, Holland murmured sympathetically. I know he's doing his best, but We have to wait for him. Vincent turned small circles impatiently. I could retrace my original path to the surgery, but that would take us through heavily traveled sections of the ship. The fact that we have encountered and had to avoid only a single party of sentries so far is indication enough that Bob can lead us there not only more quickly, but with less danger of confrontation with Reinhardt's stooges. I know. Holland suddenly frowned, eyed his mechanical associate curiously. You're not addressing him as Dr. Reinhardt anymore. He doesn't deserve the title anymore, replied Vincent matter-of-factly. Bob finally rejoined them. They hurried on, matching their pace to his, with as much patience as they could muster. It seemed as if the Cygnus's instruments themselves had acquired an eerie form of electronic sentience. Everything on the bridge was aglow, as if aware of what it was about to encounter. Its humanoid operators showed no hint of excitement. Reinhardt's attention was fixed on the image of the rotating black hole. Maximilian had finished issuing orders to the sentries, and now stood at his regular place before the command console. Bring us about, Maximilian. Line us up with navigation. Engine room? I want reaction stability reports on each engine every 60 seconds. Slowly the great ship began to pivot, aligning itself with the distant maelstrom. Gravity twisted around it, and its engines commenced to toy with the fabric of space. As the Cygnus turned, the Palomino shifted. Booth instinctively put out both hands to steady himself. We're moving. That madman's taking her into the hole for sure. He looked at Pizer. What do we do? We wait. The first officer's gaze was focused on the external optical monitor, currently peering down the umbilical connecting them to the Cygnus. Only the dim circle of light from the distant reception room showed on the screen. The sentries handled McCrae forcefully, but with care, as they pushed her toward the circular operating platform. Apparently, Reinhardt's instructions had been explicit. Control her, but don't hurt her. Don't damage the goods, she thought furiously. Her anger helped moderate the terror that threatened to overcome her. She tried to analyze the operating theater as the machines efficiently strapped her into one of the molded recesses. The multi-hued lighting felt harsh on her eyes. Probably it did not trouble the surgeons that were not men. 2 of them stood silently nearby, waiting for their next subject to be properly secured. Surely they would apply some form of anesthesia before they began work. Surely. Overhead, she recognized the fairly standard assortment of narrow-beam, high-intensity lasers. They were capable of cutting flesh or bone to within microscopic tolerances. Nearby were lengths of thin tubing for supplying or draining organic fluids, as might be required, and other instruments for inserting various artificial devices. She was so familiar with the arrangement because she had lain on a similar table once before. Idly, she wondered if the size of the module to be inserted into her brain was larger or smaller than the S-blink already there. She also wondered how much of herself would have to be removed, or disconnected. At least she no longer worried about screaming. She was too frightened. "We're coming, Dr. Kate," a familiar voice said comfortingly inside her head. Vincent, hurry, please. She could not allow herself the luxury of lapsing into hysteria. That would foil S-blink communication. Lights came on in the instrument-laden dome overhead. Anesthesia, she thought frantically. Please. I'm still conscious. She was being rotated toward the deceptively dull cluster of lights. Please. The lights vanished, subsumed in a series of far more intense flares. She turned her head away as cooling but still hot bits of metal and plastic rained down around her. Looking back the other way, she saw Holland. He was standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 hovering machines. A crazy quilt of energy beams flashed from their weapons. An occasional opposing beam scored walls or floor around them. "Bob, stop that thing and get her out of here. We'll cover you." Holland ran right, Vincent the other way, firing at anything that moved and trying to dodge the countershots of the surprised sentries in the room. Pieces of wall and machinery were flying in all directions. The noise from exploding components and torn alloy was deafening. Still waiting for their instrumentation to respond to their instructions, the 2 humanoid surgeons stood dully nearby. Then one turned and reached to activate the nearby wall communicator. Holland and Vincent noticed the movement at the same time. 2 beams struck the surgeon in tandem. What was left of him tumbled into another sentry, throwing it off balance and knocking it backward. It fell beneath several of the now malfunctioning surgical lasers, toward which McCrae was still drifting. "Stand aside, Bob." Holland took careful aim at the dangerously erratic mechanism and fired several times, making sure it was rendered completely inoperative. Bob then hurried to free McCrae, but sensed nearby motion of a belligerent nature and called out, "Behind you, Mr. Holland!" The captain whirled as 3 sentry robots crashed through the doorway recently vacated by the invaders. Before Holland could fire, Vincent popped up unexpectedly from behind a bulky storage cylinder blocking the path inward. 3 arms extended piston-like. Partially decapitated, the 3 sentries collapsed on the deck. Holland turned his attention to McCrae. Bob was helping her off the platform. "You all right?" She nodded, managed a sickly smile. "I'll be better when we're back aboard the Palomino." Wordlessly, he handed her a weapon and considered what to do next. It was unthinkable that Reinhardt would permit them to return to their ship with McCrae. He wanted her too much. Aboard the Palomino, Pizer was wishing he had a certain neck under his thumbs when the console buzzed for attention. "Dan, that you? You're receiving us? Loud and clear, what's happened?" "Kate's okay. We're on our way back." "What about pursuit?" "Scrap behind us. So far nothing in front of us. Hope it stays that way. Out." "Palomino out." He leaned back in his seat, relieved. Booth was not. He was worriedly studying his wrist chronometer. "They're cutting it close. We're running out of time. Reinhardt's going to have to engage his primary drive pretty soon. Then it'll be too late for us to break clear." "He wants us and Vincent free to monitor his dive, remember?" "We've caused him a lot of trouble, Charlie. I know his type. Before long, he's going to decide Kate's not worth the trouble. Then we'll all be dragged in." Several sentry robots arrived and cautiously entered the smoking operating theater. A door opened and a pair of humanoids appeared, started out past the sentries. The guards ignored them, moved to open another closed door. Whirling, the larger humanoid blasted the guards with a concealed laser. As soon as the sentries were downed, Bob and Vincent emerged from the room about to be searched. They hurried after their disguised companions. Unfortunately, the section of corridor they were retreating down was one of those covered by remote optical monitors. Having watched the previous action dispassionately, Reinhardt now addressed the huge machine hovering alongside him with equal unconcern. "Maximilian, tell the sentries to fire on any humanoids between Medical Station and the Palomino. Instruct them to aim for the lower limbs. I still want the woman alive, if possible." Maximilian hummed a response, communicated with the patrolling sentries far more rapidly and efficiently than Reinhardt could. Holland and the others entered a main corridor. Waiting sentries immediately opened fire from a far catwalk. The beams just missed the startled Holland. He ducked back into a side passage and joined his companions in returning the fire. "They're on to us." Headgear was removed. McCrae shook hair from her face. "Well, the costume got us this far." She threw the reflective faceplate out into the corridor. It drew several shots before it was incinerated. The distraction enabled her to knock one guard off his elevated perch. Her attention was instantly drawn from the remaining metal figures on the catwalk to movement far behind them. More sentries could be seen entering the distant end of the side passageway. "Dan, they're behind us!" Holland took a fast look, made a quick decision as he fired back at the new threat. "The catwalk! Hop to it! We can't stay here!" While he and the robots covered, she ran forward, twisting and dodging in an attempt to stay just clear of the sentry's fire. They could react rapidly, but they could not predict. She was careful to keep her movements random. With the hovering Vincent and Bob forcing the sentries to fight a multi-level battle, Holland and McCrae fought their way up the main corridor along the catwalk. Only their constant movement kept the sentries off balance, Holland knew. They were functional, but not terribly sophisticated machines. As long as Kate and he could keep from being pinned down where the mechanical's superior firepower could be brought to bear, they had a chance. Vincent and Bob dodged through the air, thoroughly confusing the sentries. Whenever one tried to concentrate on the unpredictable humans, one of the two flying robots would swoop down to destroy it. If they devoted the better part of their fire toward the robots, Holland and McCrae pressed forward to obliterate them. The sentries' slowness to make up their minds was further demonstrated when two tried to sight on the wildly diving Bob unit. He dodged between them, and they promptly shot each other before their circuitry could cancel the directive to fire. But one managed to singe Bob. McCrae was first to notice the damage. "Vincent, Bob's hit!" She couldn't devote time herself to make sure the robot was still functional. The sentries kept her too busy. Then there were no more sentries. Bob's flight had become noticeably erratic. Vincent drifted over, helped the injured machine slip smoothly toward the floor. There the load on his weakened repellers would be lessened. Holland made a quick, thorough inspection of the damage. He wished he knew more about cybernetics than the minimum that was necessary to command and perform a few basic repairs. Machines as sophisticated as Vincent and Bob were supposed to diagnose and direct their own repairs, if not able to perform them themselves. "How badly are you hurt?" Vincent inquired. "First fighting I've done in 30 years, since I was run through post-manufactured testing. I only wish it had been Reinhardt and Maximilian out there." "That's the spirit." McCrae led the way up the catwalk. Holland right behind. The two robots flanked them. Bob continued to fight to retain his stability. Within the command tower, a voiceless but clearly angry Maximilian reacted to the failure of the sentries. As if aware they were being monitored, Vincent raised an arm and executed a snappy victory signal. Despite his wishes, Reinhardt found his attention drawn by the confrontation. He was furious both at the failure to recapture Kate McCrae, and at the time he was being forced to devote to so petty a matter. "Your crack unit outwitted and outfought by some mass-produced Earth model and that antique from storage?" Maximilian pulsed crimson. The strongest form of personal expression permitted him. Reinhardt had taken care not to gift his powerful servant with too much sentience. He looked back to the image of the black hole, up to scan several readouts. "It's a pity about McCrae, but I will not leave them free to spread lies about me. I can't endanger the Cygnus by exploding their ship too soon. If they succeed in returning to their vessel with Dr. McCrae, we'll give them some distance before destroying them." They were rushing ahead when Holland suddenly grabbed McCrae and pulled her down. "Hit the deck!" "Vincent, Bob, watch yourselves. More of them up ahead." Bright arcs of destruction lanced over their heads, flashed around the evasive robots. There was a crude barricade before them. Sentry robots lined its crest, firing inaccurately but threateningly from behind the makeshift bulwark. Their poor shooting was a comfort, but the one thing Holland had feared most had come to pass. They were prevented from reaching the reception area. It was just beyond the barrier, tantalizingly near. The sentry's fire might not scorch them, he thought desperately as they rolled for cover. But if they couldn't break through, they would soon be trapped by others coming up from behind. Eventually, Reinhardt would concentrate enough firepower to kill them, no matter how unsteady the aim of the mechanicals. He knew they couldn't afford the time to take the long way around. There might not even be a long way around. They had to break through ahead, somehow.